I'm going to be talking right now about regulation and financing in the renewable energy space. And the first thing, obviously, when you do this is you want to think about what policies are driving the sector. So the main overarching policy, I would say, is a national energy policy. And that was done by a group that was put together under the Obasanjo administration. And moving on, we've got a renewable energy master plan, and that came from the ECN. And then we have an overarching policy now, which is called the NREP. It's the National Renewable Energy and Efficiency Policy. Next slide, please. So basically, the National Energy Policy is the blueprint. It contains everything. It's supposed to be a blueprint for sustainable development and how supply is going to grow within Nigeria. And that NREP we have takes its bearing from the NEP. Now, basically, what part of the plan is we just want to increase the fraction of electricity we're generating from these renewable sources. And what the policy aims to do is to ensure that at least 10% of the grid power generation comes from renewable sources, and 20% for the energy mix across board, off grids and all of that will be from renewable energy sources. Next slide, please. So basically, the big plan is to increase hydropower, and which we already have, basically, I think we have a handle on, although we haven't been able to do much with it, apart from the 3 hydropower plants we have now. But to increase the electricity generated and ensure that a minimum of 10% comes from hydropower. We also want to be able to promote efficient use of our agricultural residue, any waste that we have, and then non-wood fuels, especially for people in the rural areas. For solar, it talks about increasing contribution to about 3% by 2020. I don't need to tell you that we're already in 2020 and this hasn't happened. So we're not there yet. And in plans to get solar up to 6% by 2030. And for wind, I know there's just one wind planned right now. That's just in feasibility stages. But the plan for wind is to develop it as an alternative energy source and also to increase local capability. So I know that a bunch of people here are thinking about going into the solar space, but just to also let you know that where renewables are concerned, wind is also something that Nigeria is looking to proliferate in the near future. Next slide, please. So who are the stakeholders? And the reason why we should know the stakeholders is because these are the people we'll have to work with if you are in this space. These are the people you will be communicating with. These are the people you should be looking for information from when you're in this space. The first stakeholder, I'd say, is the Federal Ministry of Power. We already know who the Federal Ministry of Power is, and they're basically the policy driving engine of the sector. Moving on is the ECN, that's the Energy Commission of Nigeria, and I know a lot of people wonder what the ECN is supposed to do. So, well, the ECN is just the strategic planning and the coordination of the national energy policies. So they are actually supposed to cover even oil and gas and everything else in between. But I think there's a bit of a problem with deciding where exactly the ECN sits. And so that's why we don't hear as much from the ECN as we should. But they have very good information on their website. They do a lot of studies and research, so they're a good resource. NERC is the regulatory commission. They basically are the ones who are regulating the whole of the power sector. You also have the Rural Electrification Agency as a player because obviously they're looking to increase electrification rates across board in Nigeria. So going into the rural areas and connecting them sometimes to the grid, sometimes off grid is what the REA is supposed to do. Now NEMSA is another agency that a lot of people don't think about, but if you are in the solar space and you are going to be connecting people to the grid or off grid, NEMSA is important because they are the ones who have they are the standards agency. So if you're putting in meters, if you're installing any electrical, putting in any electrical installations or instruments, they need to be sure that it's safe, it's efficient, and it's the best, it meets their standards. So NEMSA is also an important body to pay attention to in the market. Now the NBT, which is the bulk trader. What the bulk trader was set up as was a credit-worthy off-taker of power. So the plan was to have all these people produce power, whether it was renewables or whether it was fossil fuel power, and then have one bulk trader that was able to offtake, which is to buy off all the power. What this does is that it gives security to people who are selling power. If you were, say, a solar generator, you would want to have somebody, you would want to have a security, which tells you that as long as I produce this power, there'll be someone to buy it. And NBT is that person. So they would buy off all the power. And the great thing about it, great, I say, quote unquote, is that they would sell the power at a levelized cost. So they would take all this power from all these people and sell it at one price. So that's basically what the NBT was supposed to do. And then you have the Transmission Company of Nigeria. Obviously, when you're selling power on grid, you would transport it through the transmission company. And then we have the other stakeholders who are the guys who generate the power. So if you were looking to go into solar generation, you will be on this side of the divide. I think Mustafa already spoke about distribution companies. The distribution companies, you already know, the AEDC, your Ikeja Electric, these are the distribution companies. And then finally, the end user customers. And in this case, the way I see it, every single Nigerian is a stakeholder in the power sector, because you will belong to one of these groups, one way or the other. If you don't work in the power sector, you will be a customer of the power sector. So we all are stakeholders, basically. Next slide, please. Now, what kind of regulatory environment is it in the renewable energy space do we have right now? So we have NERC, basically, who has set a target, who previously set a target of 2,000 megawatts of energy from these renewable sources by 2020. Now, if you notice, a lot of these policies have 2020 attached to them, and right now we are in August 2020, but a lot of these things have not happened. I think we're used to seeing some of these things. The plan actually was to have the power come from renewable energy sources. And I don't know if we've heard about the 14 solar PPAs that were supposed to come out, supposed to produce about 1,100 megawatts. And I'll talk about that later if I do have the time. But NERC had a plan and they actually put it in motion. They had actually put in feed-in tariffs in a draft regulation. So feed-in tariffs actually do exist. And what feed-in tariffs are like, when I talk about securities, they are security for power producers to say, you will be able to sell your power at this price, no matter what happens in the market, so that you're sort of protected. And the plan was also to have the distribution companies be off-takers of this energy. So basically buy at least 50% of the energy. In 2017, they also released mini-grid regulations. And the point of this regulation was to support and guide the development of off-grid power in Nigeria. So basically any size from 0 to 1 megawatt. And that was the plan. Next slide, please. So how was it for people who decided to jump on this regulation and do business in the sector? Now, there are some benefits for people who have jumped and who are just jumping into the sector. The first thing is actually, as strange as it seems, most people don't realize this, but Nigeria actually has quite robust regulation. We have better regulation than a lot of countries, even in Africa. So we do have the regulation. The problem might be implementation, but the regulation exists. There's also availability of technical support. A lot of donor agencies will support people's businesses, especially the new mini-grids that are coming into the market. Now, another thing was also the ability to charge cost-reflective tariffs. So when you are a mini-grid regulator, or usually guys in the renewable energy sector, they are able to charge more cost-reflective tariffs than people who are already in the market. You also have an early comers advantage. You're new, it's a new market. There's room for growth. And there's also that opportunity to be somebody who closes the electrification gap, which is really important. Now, what are the problems you might face? You have regulatory risk, which is what I said. There is regulation, but sometimes we don't follow our regulations. So there is a very high regulatory risk in the Nigerian market. Also, you might have difficulty accessing money. There are risks of the market, general Nigerian market, because of liquidity issues already in the power sector. You also need to increase your ability to pay. I think some people might want to mute their microphones. Yeah, so you also want to ensure that this power that is being sold has productive use so that people can actually afford to pay for it, because it's one thing to sell power to people, it's another thing for them to actually be able to pay you for it. The next thing that's the problem is challenges. You're going to have to talk to a community. If you are doing off-grid power, for example, you have to have conversations with communities. If you don't have conversations with these communities, you cannot provide them power. And also, the last speaker spoke about high overheads and operational costs. We get to the next one, please. So yeah, so this is just the sector viability. The sector is divided into the off-grid and the on-grid space. Projects that are considered, any off-grid project will be not connecting to the grid. So you're not talking up to the transmission company, you might be talking to a distribution company, or you might be talking to, for captive power. Sorry, next one, please. So yeah, so just looking at this, basically the only renewable projects we have right now that are grid connected are hydropower plants. We don't have any big solar grid connected plants. Now, in 2016, I had spoken about this, the country had signed PPAs, which are power purchase agreements, with 14 solar IPPs, and they were supposed to build over 1,100 megawatts of installed capacities. However, there's a bankability document called a PCOA, which is a put or call option agreement, which means that if there's any problem, if I'm an investor, for example, and there's any problem, the problems will be set out in that agreement, that the government will buy back my business, at least, so I can get my money back, and if I want to do that, leave the market. Unfortunately, that hasn't been signed for 12 of these solar IPPs because they don't agree with the price the solar power will be sold at. Now, grid solar projects have been successful. I would say if you can check out, there's an Egyptian project, it's called Ben Solar or something, I'll find the name, but it's an Egyptian project that's done really well, and Morocco also has some of those projects that are on grid. Unfortunately, we haven't come to that same point here in Nigeria. Next slide, please. So yeah, have there been off-grid projects? Relatively successful. We've had the GIZ support a bunch of these off-grid projects, and a lot more coming online, and they have done well. So, but the one thing that these developers face is finance. So please, let's go on for the next slide, please. Okay, so now financing this RE projects. So you usually would finance, some of the things about financing of these projects, you want to know about the sector you're investing in. You want to know that it's viable. Now, usually the lenders in Nigeria, mostly our banks, they are actually overexposed to the power sector already. And so when you go to them for loans, they will shy away from those projects, or they'll give you Shylock rates that make you run away. So the main requirements for this financing, when you're talking to any lender, is that you want a very low cost of capital, but you want it for a very long time. And so you're saying, give me $1 million and give it to me for, I don't know, 10 years at a rate of, say, 7%. I don't know anybody that's been able to access that kind of money here for a Nigerian lender. But yeah, so next slide, please. So right, so this is just explaining what I spoke about. So you need long-term, you need low rates, you need long-term capital, but unfortunately in Nigeria, generally our interest rates are high. Your lenders don't know the mini-grid markets very well. And so this is also a problem. When I'm investing in a market and I don't know it very well, it seems very risky to me. And I will have to hedge my risk by making the interest rates a bit higher. So imagine that you were going to the CBN, even if the CBN was giving money, the CBN were lending at about 15%. But if you went to a commercial bank and you were asking for that much money, you would have to pay back at rates. Right now, the rates are going as high as 30%, and that's because it's pretty risky. So it's pretty much, when they tell you 30%, they're telling you we're not giving you any money, basically. So that's what it is right now. Next, please. So how do you finance these projects? You finance with a mixture of these three things. So you'll finance with equity, which is basically giving people a portion of the business in exchange for their money. You could finance with debt, you could borrow money and you'll repay with interest over time, or you will finance with grants. And these are funds that are given to you. Some people call it free money, but usually it's not free. So an international donor agency will give it to you for the purpose of achieving some sort of goal, a developmental goal. So they would sometimes give you money, or they will give you some of the equipment you need. And we've seen a bunch of these projects. Actually, I don't know any project right now that has been funded without any type of grant. Because at the rates we're seeing now in the mini grids of about some going as high as 150 naira, 120. Thing is, they have a grant part of it. So that's why it's even that cheap. If there was no grant, if all they had was equity and debt, it'd probably be a lot more expensive per kilowatt hour. Next, please. So what are the sources of finance? Who are the people that we can approach for finance? We're talking government treasuries. We've got a sovereign wealth fund in Nigeria. Other countries have that too. We've got our commercial banks, the impact investors, development partners. You've got private capital and investment fund managers. You've also got high net worth individuals, so people who've got a lot of money. You can find those. You've got corporate treasury departments, pension funds, any endowments, any charities. These are the sort of people that you'd be going to if you're looking for money in this space. Next, please. And so talking about financing, what kind of money have people been able to access? So I'm looking at this graph, it's just from Bloomberg Nerf, it's just basically showing how much money has been invested in renewable energy in Africa. So if you look at 2004, we're looking at about $100 million. And by 2018, we're looking at an investment of $2.8 billion. Now, Nigeria is the red. I don't know if you can see the red. So we had some money put in at about 2007. If you see in 2012, there was a little bit more money put in, more money in, I think, 2014. And I think the highest we've had is in 2017. So there have been some of these projects that have been able to access finance and finance from all over the world. But we haven't done as well as we could, basically. Next slide, please. So sorry, if you go back, if you look at that slide, you can see that Kenya actually has been doing quite well. Kenya is doing well with geothermals, they're doing well with solar. For some reason, we're not where Kenya is, but when it comes to sub-Saharan Africa, we're looking at the investments. I think Kenya actually is doing quite well in the space. Next, please. So in Nigeria, what we've started to do is to issue green bonds. And basically, this is raising bonds for the purpose of carrying out green projects. So renewable energy projects will be in that space. And we've seen a growth in green bonds. Now, it might look like nothing is happening. So if you look at this graph, you can barely see Africa. If you look really hard, it's a small thin line on top of all of these countries. But there is green bond. We're raising green bonds in Africa, and actually, especially in Nigeria. I actually think that Nigeria is one of the countries where green bonds are being raised. If you go into the next slide, please. So yeah, so we have launched our Green Bond Market Development Program. Between 2018 and 2019, it raised about 49 billion naira from those bonds. The Ministry of Environment actually has put out bonds, and you can subscribe. Well, it's gone now, but you could subscribe at some point to those bonds. And also now we're having corporate green bonds put out, and corporates actually raised 23 billion or 23.5 billion of those bonds between 2018 and 2019. So this money is becoming available for people who actually are looking for money in the space. And why it's important to know that there's money in the space is that where money is, then business follows. As soon as money comes into a space, then investors are interested, because that means if we're raising money for the space, it means that there's something interesting going on there. So I think one of the things I always say is, if you follow the money, then you know where the work is. So if you pay attention to all of these guys and you see where the money's going, you have an idea of where to go into business, or if you're looking for work, what type of work to be looking for per time. Yeah, I think that's it for me.